Hey guys, tonight we're taking a journey back in time, way before the gentle hum of your kitchen refrigerator was even a glimmer in a scientist's eye. Picture this: you're living in an ancient city, the sun beating down mercilessly, the air thick and heavy. There's no flicking a switch for air conditioning, no grabbing a frosty beverage from a chilled compartment. Tonight, we're diving into the surprisingly sophisticated and utterly ingenious world of ancient ice houses and the relentless human quest for coolness. Imagine the sheer luxury, the almost magical quality of encountering ice in the blistering heat of a Persian desert or a Roman summer. It sounds like a simple thing, a bit of cold. But honestly, without the advanced food preservation and cooling technologies we take for granted, you probably won't survive this if you were suddenly dropped into the daily grind of ancient life. Especially not with your modern palate expecting crisp salads and chilled Chardonnay. Spoilage was a constant battle, and a truly cold drink pure sorcery. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from tonight and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment below. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing under a sky that feels like a brass bowl, heated in a cosmic forge. The sun, a relentless eye in that vast expanse, pours down its energy without apology. This is the reality of summer in many parts of the ancient world, from the bustling river valleys of Mesopotamia to the sun-baked shores of the Mediterranean. The quest for coolness, like you quickly realize, isn't some modern affectation, some decadent desire born of technological prowess. It's a fundamental human need, a deep-seated craving for respite from the oppressive, life-sapping heat. You can almost feel the sticky sweat on your brow, the drag in your steps, the yearning for just a whisper of a cool breeze, a sip of something that doesn't feel like lukewarm bathwater. Before the advent of purposeful ice-making and storage, life in hot climates was a constant negotiation with the heat. You'd see people seeking refuge in the shade of narrow alleyways, the interiors of thick-walled buildings, or perhaps retreating into naturally cooler caves and grottos during the fiercest part of the day. Some quirky tidbits from folklore suggest that certain cool caves or underground springs were sometimes considered sacred places, perhaps believed to be touched by chthonic deities or earth spirits, their coolness a divine blessing. It's easy to see why such places would be revered. They were natural sanctuaries. Daily life was structured around the sun's tyranny. Siestas were not just a charming cultural habit, they were a survival mechanism. Clothing was loose, made of breathable linen or light wool, and proximity to water, rivers, lakes. The sea was highly prized, not just for sustenance, but for the cooling relief it offered. The ancient Egyptians, for example, demonstrated early ingenuity with passive cooling techniques. A well-documented historical fact is their use of evaporative cooling by hanging wet reeds in windows or doorways, allowing the breeze to carry cooled, moistened air into their homes. They also used porous earthenware jars to keep water relatively cool, the evaporation through the clay drawing heat away from the contents. Simple, yet effective, and a principle we'll see scaled up dramatically. But these are all passive measures, ways of mitigating the heat, of finding small pockets of relief. What about active cooling? What about the dream? The audacious desire to have ice, actual solid frozen water, in places where nature didn't provide it year-round, or at least not when it was most desperately needed. This is where the real ingenuity, the human drive to conquer environmental limitations, truly begins to shine. Imagine the first time someone somewhere in a mountainous region looked at the snow and ice lingering on high peaks even as the valleys below sweltered, and thought, what if we could bring that down? What if we could keep it? That what if is the spark that ignites our story. The challenges were, of course, immense. How do you harvest something that melts? How do you transport it, often over considerable distances, without it vanishing into a puddle, and most crucially, how on earth do you store it? Sometimes for months, so that it's available in the height of summer. This was the pre-fridge cooling challenge, and it was a monumental one. You couldn't just pop down to the corner store for a bag of ice. If you wanted something cold, you, or more likely your servants if you were wealthy enough, had to plan, to build, to toil. The 5-second rule for food dropped on the floor probably became the 1-second rule in many ancient kitchens, with spoilage being a relentless enemy. Warm wine wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a daily tragedy for those who could afford wine at all. The desire for preserved cold wasn't solely about comfort, though a chilled drink on a scorching day would have felt like a gift from the gods. It was also about luxury, a potent status symbol. Imagine a king or a wealthy merchant impressing guests with iced delicacies in mid-July. It spoke of power, of resources, of the ability to command nature itself. Furthermore, as we'll explore later, cold had recognized medicinal uses, helping to reduce fevers or soothe inflammation. Archaeologists and historians still argue whether the earliest systematic efforts to harvest and preserve snow and ice were driven primarily by the demand for such culinary luxuries among the elite, or if more practical considerations like medicine or targeted food preservation for specific, valuable items played an equally significant role from the outset. So this is our stage, a world yearning for coolness, a world without the convenience of modern refrigeration, a world where heat was a formidable adversary. It's against this backdrop that humanity began its long, fascinating journey into the art and science of ice preservation. The solutions they devised, using nothing but natural materials, clever design, and an astute understanding of basic physics, are nothing short of astonishing. Forget your smart fridge with its Wi-Fi connection for a moment. The ancient air conditioning, or rather ice provision, often involved a long chain of human labor, from the poor soul actually cutting ice on a frozen mountain lake to the servant carefully rationing it out. Perhaps while another diligently waved a large palm frond with a very strong sense of duty. From the rudimentary pits dug into the earth to the magnificent, cathedral-like yakshals of Persia, the quest for cold spurred incredible innovation. And it's those innovations we're about to unearth. You're standing on that precipice of human ingenuity, the point where the sheer desire for coolness began to morph into concrete action. The passive acceptance of summer's heat was no longer enough, at least not for everyone. So, where do we first see the flickering embers of this audacious idea? The deliberate harvesting and storage of winter's chill for summer's trial? Our journey takes us eastward, into the sun-drenched plains of Mesopotamia, the land nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a cradle of civilization. While this region is famed for its sweltering summers, it also lies within reach of formidable mountain ranges like the Zagros to the northeast, peaks that wear a cap of snow and ice for a good part of the year. It's here, in ancient Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Mary, that we find some of the earliest whispers of humanity's frosty ambition. Imagine the scene: a royal court in a city like Ur or Babylon. The air outside is thick enough to swim through, the sun relentlessly baking the mud brick walls. Yet, inside the palace, the king enjoys a chilled wine, or a delicacy kept remarkably fresh. How is this possible? It's not magic, though it might have seemed so to the uninitiated. It's the result of incredible effort and early engineering. The first ice delivery service in history probably had some pretty terrible Yelp reviews if a shipment arrived as lukewarm water. My royal sherbet is now royal soup. 1 star. A clay tablet might have read. Concrete evidence for this frosty enterprise comes from places like the ancient city of Mari, where, during the reign of King Zimri-Lim around the 18th century BCE, that's nearly 4,000 years ago, cuneiform tablets from his palace archives speak of an ice house, or bit shurapim in Akkadian. This is a fantastic historical fact, not just a vague notion, but actual textual evidence of dedicated structures for storing ice. Zimri-Lim, it seems, was a king who appreciated the finer, cooler things in life. But how did this ice, this shuripum, get from the distant, cold mountains to his royal goblet? You have to picture the sheer logistical challenge. During the harsh winter months, teams of laborers would be dispatched high into the Zagros Mountains. They're tasked to cut and collect compacted snow and ice from sheltered valleys or frozen lakes. This wasn't a leisurely stroll, it was arduous, dangerous work in freezing conditions. Imagine those ancient Mesopotamian kids, if they were part of such an expedition, though hopefully not, plaintively asking, "Are we there yet?" But instead of a comfy minivan, it's a long, cold trek with donkeys. Once harvested, the precious cold cargo had to be insulated for its journey. Large blocks of ice or compacted snow would be carefully packed in straw, chaff, or animal hides, anything that could create air pockets and slow down the inevitable melting process. Then began the long, slow descent from the mountains, likely by donkey caravan, winding down treacherous paths towards the plains. Speed was of the essence, yet the journey was inherently slow. Every drop that melted was a loss of a valuable, almost priceless commodity. Upon arrival in the cities, the ice needed immediate and effective storage if it was to last even a few weeks, let alone into the scorching summer months. What did these very early Mesopotamian ice houses look like? They were probably a far cry from the sophisticated structures we'll encounter later in Persia. Think underground pits, dug deep into the earth to take advantage of its natural insulating properties. These pits might have been lined with timber or stone, perhaps with a layer of gravel at the bottom for drainage, crucial for whisking away any meltwater, which would only accelerate the thawing of the remaining ice. Thick layers of straw, reeds, or sawdust would have been used to insulate the ice from the surrounding earth and the oppressive heat above. A simple, sturdy roof, perhaps made of mud brick and more insulating material, would have offered shade. Naturally, such a labor-intensive and resource-heavy commodity was not for the average citizen. Ice in ancient Mesopotamia was an extreme luxury, a powerful status symbol almost exclusively reserved for the royal court. The temples where it might have been used in rituals or to cool offerings, and the absolute wealthiest echelons of society. To be able to offer a guest a chilled drink in the Mesopotamian summer was a statement of immense power and influence. You can just imagine the wide-eyed incredulity of a desert nomad, accustomed to the unrelenting heat, witnessing a king casually sipping something frosty. It would have seemed like potent sorcery, a divine favor. Perhaps some even believed the stored ice itself held magical properties, a captured piece of winter's fierce purity. While the existence of structures like Zimri-Lim's ice house is confirmed, the precise day-to-day operational details, such as the exact efficiency of long-distance ice transport or the specific construction nuances that maximized preservation in such a challenging climate, remain subjects of ongoing research and lively debate among Assyriologists and archaeologists. They pore over fragmented texts and survey ancient sites, trying to piece together the full picture of this frosty facet of Mesopotamian life. The king demanding his chilled beverage, and a nervous servant having to explain the concept of seasonal availability or supply chain issues with the donkey caravan from Mount Nisir, before the advent of reliable year-round ice storage, makes for a comical, yet probably quite stressful, royal exchange. These early Mesopotamian efforts, born out of royal desire and a burgeoning understanding of insulation and thermal mass, represent the first serious foray into the world of artificial cooling. They were learning, adapting, and laying the groundwork for even more astonishing innovations that would soon emerge in neighboring lands. The thirst for coolness had found its first champions, and the mountains had yielded their frozen treasures, albeit with considerable effort. The age of ice had begun, not with a bang, but with the slow, careful stacking of frozen blocks in a dark, cool pit. Okay, I understand you'd like all the remaining sections from 3 to 15 plus the wind down in one continuous response. This will be quite a long journey, but let's embark on it. From those early, often royal-centric efforts in Mesopotamia, where ice was a hard-won luxury coaxed from distant mountains, Our quest for ancient coolness now leads us to the vast, arid plateau of ancient Persia, modern-day Iran. Here, in a land often characterized by scorching sun and sprawling deserts, you find some of the most astonishing and elegant solutions to the ice storage challenge, the magnificent yakhchals. The very word yakhchal in Persian means ice pit. Yakh, ice, chal, pit. But these structures were so much more than simple holes in the ground. They were monumental feats of engineering, true desert ice wonders, capable of producing and storing ice even when the ambient temperature soared. Imagine you're a traveler crossing the Persian landscape centuries ago. In the distance, rising from the flat, sun-baked earth, you see a strange conical dome, its smooth, mud brick surface gleaming dully in the heat. It looks almost like a giant beehive or some colossal, mysterious pottery kiln. As you draw closer, you might feel a subtle but distinct drop in temperature in its immediate vicinity. This, you realize, is no ordinary building. This is a yakhchal, a silent, powerful guardian of precious ice, a testament to Persian ingenuity that allowed people to enjoy frozen desserts and chilled drinks in one of the hottest climates on Earth. It's like finding an alien spaceship dedicated to ice cream in the middle of Death Valley, utterly unexpected and deeply impressive. The brilliance of the yakhchal lay not just in its ability to store ice brought from the mountains, though it did that too, but in its capacity to passively produce ice during the cold, clear desert nights, and then keep it frozen for months, right through the blistering summer. This was a game changer. While Mesopotamians were largely reliant on harvesting ice from far-off peaks, the Persians developed a system that could, in suitable locations, make ice closer to home, utilizing the natural properties of their environment. How did they achieve this frosty miracle? It was a combination of clever design features working in concert. The most visible part, the tall, conical dome, could rise up to 60 feet around 18 meters high. This distinctive shape wasn't just for show, it served a crucial aerodynamic purpose, encouraging hot air to rise and escape through an opening at its apex, while drawing in cooler air from below. Think of it as a giant, passive chimney designed for coolness rather than smoke. The walls of this dome were incredibly thick, sometimes up to 2 meters at the base, constructed from a special waterproof mortar called saruj. This mortar, a traditional Iranian building material, was made from sand, clay, egg whites, lime, goat hair, and ash in specific proportions, rendering it highly resistant to heat transfer and water penetration. A kind of ancient super insulator. Forget your modern foam insulation. These guys were doing it with egg whites and determination. Beneath this impressive dome lay the heart of the yakhchal, a vast, subterranean storage space, the pit part of its name. This space could be enormous, capable of holding thousands of cubic meters of ice. Being underground, it naturally benefited from the Earth's stable, cooler temperatures. But the real magic often happened nearby, in shallow canals or rectangular ponds located typically on the north side of the yakhchal, shaded from the sun by the structure itself or by ancillary walls. During the cold desert nights, when temperatures could plummet below freezing even if the days were warm, these canals would be filled with a thin layer of fresh water. The clear desert sky, low humidity, and chilly night air would work their evaporative and radiative cooling magic, causing the water to freeze. By morning, a layer of ice would have formed. This ice would then be broken up, collected, and transferred into the deep, insulated pit of the yakhchal before the sun's rays could reclaim it. Night after night, this process would be repeated, thus gradually filling the yakhchal with precious, locally made ice. It was like having your own personal ice factory, powered by the desert night. The ancient Persians were also masters of harnessing wind power, and this played a role in some yakhchal designs. Wind catchers, or badgirs, those distinctive towers you still see in Iranian architecture, were sometimes incorporated to channel cool night breezes down into the ice pit or over the freezing canals, further enhancing the cooling effect. It's a historical fact that wind catchers themselves are an ancient Persian invention, designed for natural ventilation and cooling in arid climates. So their integration with ice-making technology was a logical step. Scholars and engineers still marvel at the thermal efficiency of these structures. While the basic principles of evaporative cooling and insulation were understood, the Persians refined them to an extraordinary degree. There's an ongoing appreciation, rather than a fierce debate, for just how perfectly these elements were balanced. The exact origins of the yakchal are somewhat lost in the mists of time, with some evidence suggesting their use as far back as 400 BCE during the Achaemenid Empire, if not earlier. Imagine Darius the Great, after a long day of running an empire, kicking back with a chilled sherbet. Courtesy of his royal yakchal, he probably wouldn't have complained if his ice butler was a bit slow. The alternative was, well, warm sherbet. And that's just not an imperial look. The ice produced and stored in these yakshals was used for preserving food, cooling drinks, and making traditional Persian frozen desserts like falodeh, a delightful concoction of thin vermicelli-like noodles, semi-frozen sugar syrup, and rosewater, which is still enjoyed in Iran today. A quirky tidbit, it's said that sometimes fruit would be placed in the yakchal to freeze within the ice, creating a sort of ancient fruit-infused ice block, a luxury within a luxury. The yakshal wasn't just a building, it was a lifeline to comfort, a symbol of ingenuity, and a cornerstone of Persian culinary and social life in a challenging environment. It stands as a proud, conical monument to a people who didn't just endure the desert heat, but elegantly, cleverly, and coolly outsmarted it. So, you're gazing at this magnificent Persian yakchal, this cone of cool rising from the desert floor, and you can't help but wonder about the nitty-gritty details of its construction. It's one thing to appreciate its purpose, but it's another to understand the sheer genius embedded in its very fabric. Building one of these ancient refrigerators wasn't a casual weekend DIY project. It was a serious undertaking, relying on generations of accumulated knowledge about materials, climate, and the subtle physics of heat and cold. Let's start from the ground down. The heart of the yakchal, as we've touched upon, was the vast underground storage pit. This wasn't just a rough hole in the earth. It was often carefully shaped, sometimes square or rectangular, but frequently circular, and dug to a considerable depth. Perhaps 5 to 15 meters, roughly 15 to 50 feet. The deeper you go, the more stable and cool the Earth's temperature becomes, providing a natural buffer against the scorching surface heat. The base of this pit would often incorporate a drainage system, perhaps a central sump or channels leading away from the structure, because meltwater was the enemy. Any water that accumulated would rapidly accelerate the thawing of the remaining ice. So getting rid of it was paramount. You can't have your precious ice slowly turning into an underground swimming pool, especially if you're planning on it lasting through a blazing summer. That's just bad for business, and terrible for your faluda. The walls of this subterranean chamber, and indeed the entire above-ground dome, were where the real magic of ancient Persian materials science came into play. They were constructed using specially prepared mud bricks, sun-dried to an incredible hardness. But the real star was the mortar and plaster known as sarouj. Remember that concoction of sand, clay, egg whites, lime, goat hair, and ash? This wasn't just some random mix. Each ingredient played a role. The lime provided binding and strength. The ash, often from bathhouses, a quirky source of specific chemical properties, contributed to its hydraulic qualities. Resistance to water, the goat hair acted like ancient fiberglass, adding tensile strength and reducing cracking. And the egg whites, well, historians and material scientists still debate the precise role of egg whites in ancient mortars, but they are believed to have acted as a plasticizer, or perhaps an organic binder, improving workability and durability. The result was a material that was incredibly dense, highly insulating, and virtually waterproof. The yakshal builders would often apply layers of sarouj, sometimes several inches thick, to both the interior and exterior surfaces, creating an almost hermetically sealed environment for the ice. It was like encasing the cold in a custom-built ceramic thermos. Now, for that iconic conical dome. Its construction was a marvel of ancient engineering, often built without complex scaffolding, using a spiraling technique where each layer of bricks supported the next as it rose. The shape itself was a masterstroke. The tall, tapering form minimized the surface area exposed to the direct, high-angle summer sun, reducing solar heat gain. More importantly, it promoted natural convection. Hot air, being lighter, would rise up the smooth, inward-curving walls of the dome and escape through an opening at the very top. This created a gentle, continuous updraft, drawing cooler air from the base of the structure, often from vents strategically placed on the north side, away from the sun or even connected to underground canals. Subterranean aqueducts. It's a bit like how a modern cooling tower works, but achieved with mud bricks and an ancient understanding of airflow. The dome wasn't just a lid, it was an active part of the cooling engine. Many yakchals also featured associated walls, typically running east to west and located to the south of the main structure. These walls, sometimes very tall and thick, were designed to shade the entrance of the ice pit and, crucially, to shade the shallow freezing ponds or canals that were often situated on the north side of the yakchal. During the day, these walls would cast long shadows, protecting the sensitive ice-making areas from the sun's direct rays. This significantly improved the efficiency of nighttime ice production. It's a simple concept, shade, but applied on a grand and effective scale. You wouldn't want your fledgling ice sheets to get a sunburn before they even made it into storage. Would you? The process of actually making the ice in these canals, as we touched on, relied on the dramatic temperature drop that occurs in deserts at night. Clear night skies allow for significant radiative cooling, heat radiating from the water surface out into the cold expanse of space. Low humidity accelerates evaporative cooling. The thin layer of water in the canals would give up its heat quickly, and by morning, a sheet of ice would be ready for harvesting. This ice was then ferried, often in baskets or on sleds, into the yakshal through a dedicated, heavily insulated entrance, and carefully packed down, sometimes with layers of straw or reeds between the blocks to provide further insulation and prevent them from fusing into one giant, unmanageable mass. A historical fact for you, some of these yakshals were so effective that ice could be kept for many months. From the ice-making season in winter right through to the peak of summer, and sometimes even beyond. This wasn't just short-term storage. It was a long-haul preservation strategy. The sheer volume of ice, combined with the superb insulation and passive cooling mechanisms, created a stable and frigid environment. One joke might be that the yakchal attendants probably had the coolest jobs in ancient Persia. Literally. The scholarly debate here often revolves around the precise balance of factors: dome height versus pit depth, the specific mineral composition of local clays for saruj, the optimal orientation to prevailing winds that contributed to the success of different yakchals in varying microclimates across the Persian Empire. It wasn't a one-size-fits-all solution, but a highly adaptable technology. The yakchal stands as a testament to a deep, empirical understanding of natural forces, a beautiful marriage of form and function, all dedicated to the simple yet profound pleasure of cold in a hot land. Leaving the magnificent conical domes of Persia behind, our journey in search of ancient frosty delights takes us further east, to the vast and sophisticated empire of ancient China. Here, too, the desire for coolness in the face of sweltering summers spurred remarkable ingenuity in the harvesting, storage, and utilization of ice. Chinese traditions surrounding ice were ancient, deeply ingrained in imperial ritual, and managed with a level of bureaucratic organization that you might expect from such a highly structured civilization. Forget a lone yakchal attendant. Think imperial ice ministers and detailed records. Okay, maybe not ice ministers, but the procurement was certainly a state-level concern. As far back as the Shang dynasty, roughly 1600 to 1046 BCE, there are hints of ice being used. But it's during the Zhou dynasty circa 1046 to 256 BCE that we find more concrete textual references to ice cellars or ice houses, Ling Yin or Bing Yin. The Book of Rites Liji, a classic text compiled over centuries, even describes specific rituals associated with the opening of the ice house at the beginning of summer, and the ceremonial offering of ice to ancestors and deities. This wasn't just about keeping the emperor's grapes chilled. Ice had a ritualistic and symbolic importance. Imagine the solemn procession, the officials in their robes, the first blocks of winter's preserved chill brought forth. It elevates ice beyond mere refreshment to something sacred, a tangible piece of winter's purity offered up in summer's heat. So, how do the ancient Chinese get their ice? Unlike the Persians who, in some cases, could make ice near their yakchals, the Chinese primarily relied on harvesting natural ice from frozen rivers, lakes, and ponds during the coldest winter months. This was a major operation, often involving thousands of laborers. They would wait until the ice was sufficiently thick and strong. Then teams would set out to cut it into large, uniform blocks. The tools were simple: saws, axes, chisels, but the effort was immense. You can picture the scene-bundled figures working on a vast, frozen expanse, their breath misting in the frigid air, the rhythmic chipping and sawing echoing across the ice. It was probably a bit like an ancient Chinese version of ice road truckers, but with more manual labor and significantly less chance of finding a Tim Hortons at the end of the shift. Once cut, these massive blocks of ice had to be transported to the imperial ice houses, or those belonging to wealthy nobles. This often involved sledges, carts, or even manpower, depending on the distance and terrain. And the storage itself. The ancient Chinese ice houses were typically subterranean pits, much like the early Mesopotamian ones, but often on a grander scale and with more refined insulation techniques. They would be dug deep into the earth, lined with stone or timber, and then meticulously insulated with layers of straw, reeds, sawdust, or chaff. The entrance would be sealed tightly to prevent warm air from seeping in. A historical fact here records from the Tang Dynasty 618-907. CE mention enormous imperial ice stores, with some capable of holding tens of thousands of blocks of ice. That's enough to keep a lot of imperial brows cool. The use of ice in ancient China was varied. For the emperor and his court, it was a symbol of luxury and power. Chilled drinks, fruits cooled with ice, and even precursors to ice cream or sorbets were enjoyed. One ancient Chinese delicacy, which some consider a forerunner to ice cream, involved mixing milk or goat's milk or buffalo milk, flour, and camphor with ice, or sometimes packing a milk mixture into a container and then placing that container in a mixture of ice and saltpeter potassium nitrate to lower the freezing point. A quirky but effective bit of ancient chemistry that Marco Polo may or may not have brought back to Europe, depending on which historical account you favor. The debate among food historians about the true origins of ice cream and the extent of Chinese influence is a long and delicious one. Beyond culinary uses, ice also played a role in preservation, helping to keep fish, meats, and other perishable goods fresh for longer, especially during transportation or for imperial banquets. And much like in other ancient cultures, it likely had medicinal applications, used to reduce fevers or soothe injuries. The imperial court even had officials specifically tasked with overseeing the ice service, ensuring a steady supply throughout the warmer months. You can imagine the pressure on these officials. If the emperor's lychees weren't perfectly chilled, heads might metaphorically or perhaps literally roll. It wasn't just about comfort, it was about maintaining the expected standards of imperial life, a display of the empire's ability to command even the elements. There's a certain poetry to the ancient Chinese approach to ice. The ritualistic reverence, the sheer scale of the harvesting operations, the meticulous organization. It speaks of a society that valued not just the practical benefits of ice, but also its symbolic connection to the cycles of nature. The captured essence of winter's yin energy brought forth to balance the yang of summer's fire. While perhaps not as architecturally dramatic on the outside as a Persian Yakchal's dome, the vast, hidden world of the Chinese imperial ice pits was no less a marvel of ancient engineering and logistical prowess, ensuring that even in the heart of summer, a touch of winter's frosty magic was never far from the emperor's reach. Swinging our historical compass westward from the imperial courts of China, we find ourselves amidst the sun-drenched landscapes and azure waters of the ancient Greco-Roman world. Here, too, the allure of coolness was a powerful force, though their methods for acquiring and using ice and snow often took on a distinctly Mediterranean flavor, emphasizing luxury, philosophical debate, and a healthy dose of because we can among the elite. You might not find colossal yakchals dotting the Greek countryside, but the desire for a chilled libation or a refreshingly cool compress was just as keen. For the ancient Greeks, particularly in the classical and Hellenistic periods, snow was the more commonly sought-after commodity rather than solid ice, primarily because it was more readily available from nearby mountains like Mount Olympus or Parnassus. Imagine a sweltering Athenian summer. The philosophers are debating in the agora, the citizens are seeking shade, and a wealthy symposiarch, the host of a drinking party or symposium, wants to impress his guests. He wouldn't be caught dead serving warm wine. That's practically a philosophical crime in itself, so runners or mules would be dispatched to the mountains to collect snow. This snow would be carefully packed in insulating materials like straw or cloth and rushed down to the cities. It was a race against time, a melting relay to deliver this fleeting luxury. The Greeks didn't typically build massive, dedicated icehouse structures in the same vein as the Persians or Chinese, at least not in the earlier periods. Their storage methods were often simpler, perhaps deep, shaded pits or cellars, heavily insulated, where the snow could be kept for a limited time. The emphasis was more on rapid transport and immediate or near-immediate consumption. A historical fact, the Greek physician Hippocrates, the father of medicine circa 460 to 370 BCE, actually wrote about the use of cold, recommending it for reducing swelling and pain. But he also cautioned against drinking iced water too frequently, believing it could cause stomach upsets. So, even as they enjoyed it, there was a typically Greek analytical eye cast upon its effects. The use of snow was primarily for cooling wine. The Greeks often mixed their wine with water, and adding snow to this mixture would create a delightfully chilled beverage, a true mark of sophistication at a symposium. It's said that Alexander the Great, during his campaigns in hot climates, had trenches filled with snow so his soldiers could enjoy cooled wine. Talk about boosting troop morale. Forget extra rations, give them chilled vino. He might have declared, a quirky tidbit from this era involves the concept of snow shops, or snow sellers, individuals or businesses that specialized in procuring and selling snow to wealthy patrons. It was a luxury trade, and the price of snow would fluctuate depending on its availability and the intensity of the summer heat. You can imagine the outrage if your regular snow runner showed up with a half-melted bag and still tried to charge full price. By Zeus, this is barely slush. As we transition to the Roman world, the scale and organization often ramped up, as was the Roman way. Wealthy Romans, with their sprawling villas and penchant for opulent banquets, also craved the relief of cold. Like the Greeks, they primarily used snow, harvested from mountains such as the Apennines or even the Alps for those in northern Italy. The poet Martial and the writer Seneca both mention the use of snow to cool drinks and the elaborate efforts undertaken to procure it. Seneca, in his characteristic Stoic fashion, even grumbled about the decadence of it all. Seeing the desire for artificially cooled drinks in summer as a sign of society going soft, he probably would have had a field day with modern ice cream parlors. So many flavors of cold corruption, he might lament. The Romans, renowned for their engineering prowess, did develop more sophisticated methods for storing their precious snow. They constructed snow pits or cellars, often lined with stone and heavily insulated with straw, chaff, and sometimes even layers of wool. These pits would be located in the coolest, shadiest parts of a villa's estate or in designated areas within cities. The goal was to create a stable, cool microclimate to preserve the snow for as long as possible. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about the extent to which Roman snow pits were purely for short-term storage versus attempts at longer-term preservation comparable to other cultures' ice houses, and how their designs might have varied across the vast Roman Empire, adapting to local climates and available materials. The transport of snow to Roman cities was a significant logistical operation. Fast horses, mules, and dedicated slaves were involved in bringing the snow down from the mountains, often traveling at night to minimize melting. Once it arrived, it would be carefully packed away. For the ultra-wealthy, having a private, well-stocked snow pit was the ultimate status symbol. Imagine a Roman emperor like Nero, known for his excesses, demanding snow for his extravagant feasts even in the height of summer. The imperial machinery would ensure it was provided, no matter the cost or effort. It's probably safe to say that if you were a Roman slave tasked with snow duty, you hoped for a mild summer or a posting somewhere cooler. Like Britannia? So, while the Greeks and Romans might not have left behind the same monumental ice house architecture as the Persians, their ingenious methods of harvesting, transporting, and storing mountain snow demonstrate a similar deep-seated desire to conquer the heat. From the philosophical musings on its health effects to the sheer logistical ballet of its procurement. Snow was a cool thread woven into the fabric of Greco-Roman luxury and daily life, a fleeting taste of winter's chill in a sun-drenched world. As we linger in the Roman world, a civilization renowned for its roads, aqueducts, and monumental architecture, it's no surprise that their approach to snow preservation, while perhaps not resulting in structures as iconic as the Yakchal, still bore the hallmarks of their engineering genius and meticulous planning. You've got the snow, rushed down from the Apennines or even the distant Alps by swift mules and hardy slaves. But now, the real challenge begins. How do you keep this fluffy, frozen treasure from becoming a disappointing puddle before Emperor Bigus Nemeus demands his chilled Falernian wine? The Romans, as you might expect, didn't just dig a hole and hope for the best. Their insulated ice pits, often called conservae nivis snow reserves, were thoughtfully designed. Location was key. They would typically be sited on the cooler, north-facing slopes of hills or within the shaded courtyards of villas, often partially or fully subterranean to take advantage of the Earth's natural insulating properties. Remember how your grandparents might have had a root cellar that stayed cool year-round? The Romans were tapping into that same basic principle, but on a grander scale and with a much more meltable commodity. Construction often involved excavating a deep pit, which could be circular or rectangular. The walls of this pit would then be meticulously lined, perhaps with stone, brick, or even timber, creating a solid, stable structure. This lining wasn't just for structural integrity, it also helped to create a barrier against moisture from the surrounding soil. Drainage was absolutely critical. A well-designed Roman snow pit would incorporate a system to draw off any meltwater, perhaps a slightly sloped floor leading to a sump or a covered drain pipe. If the snow sat in its own melt, it would disappear faster than a politician's promise. One rather quirky tidbit is the speculation that some of these drains might have been cleverly disguised or designed to prevent pests from finding their way into the precious snow reserve. Imagine a rat setting up a winter holiday home in the emperor's snow supply. Heads would roll. The real secret, however, lay in the insulation. Once the pit was prepared, it would be heavily lined with layers of insulating materials. Straw was a favorite, readily available and excellent at trapping air. Chaff, the dry husks of grain, was another common choice. Sometimes coarse woolen cloths or animal hides might be used. The snow itself would be packed down as densely as possible, because compacted snow melts more slowly than loose. Fluffy snow. Layers of insulating material would often be interspersed with the layers of packed snow, creating a sort of ancient thermal lasagna. The top of the pit would be covered with a thick layer of straw and earth, often crowned with a thatched roof or a more permanent wooden structure to provide further shade and protection from the elements. The entrance would be small and kept tightly sealed, opened only when snow was needed to minimize the intrusion of warm air. It was a battle of degrees, a constant effort to maintain that delicate, frozen equilibrium. A significant historical fact is that the Romans were adept at water management, as evidenced by their aqueducts. While not directly related to ice making, their understanding of hydraulics and construction with materials like Roman concrete opus caementicium meant they had the technical skills to build durable, waterproof structures, which would have been beneficial for constructing high-quality snow pits. They knew how to build things that lasted and things that held water, or, in this case, kept it out and channeled meltwater away. Transporting the snow from the mountains to these urban or villa-based storage pits was, as we've touched upon, a major undertaking. It involved not just speed but also careful packing. The snow would be tightly compressed into sacks or baskets, often lined with straw, and loaded onto fast mules or carts. These snow convoys would travel primarily at night, when temperatures were cooler, to minimize loss. The logistics involved coordinating the harvesters in the mountains, the packers, the transport teams, and the storage attendants at the destination would have required a level of organization that the Romans excelled at. They could organize an army. They could certainly organize a snow delivery service for the elite, even if it meant some poor legionary got reassigned from guarding Hadrian's Wall to making sure Caesar's sorbet base didn't melt. For the glory of Rome, and for chilled figs. He might grumble. Historians still debate the ultimate efficiency of Roman snow pits compared to, say, Persian yakchals, especially for very long-term storage. The Roman system seems to have been geared more towards preserving large quantities of snow for use throughout a single summer season, rather than necessarily making ice or keeping it for multiple years. However, their methods were clearly effective enough to ensure that the wealthy could enjoy cooled beverages and other chilled luxuries, even when the Italian sun was at its most ferocious. The remnants of some of these snow pits have been found by archaeologists, offering tantalizing clues into their construction and scale. While perhaps less visually dramatic than a towering yakchal, these carefully engineered pits were another testament to Roman ingenuity. A quiet, subterranean network dedicated to defying the summer heat, one insulated clod of snow at a time. They understood that keeping cool wasn't just about having the snow, it was about the science of keeping it. So, you've got your snow harvested from a treacherous mountain peak, your ice meticulously cut from a frozen Mesopotamian river, or cleverly formed in a Persian yakchal's shadow. The next monumental hurdle, before anyone can enjoy that refreshing chill, is getting it to the consumer. This wasn't just a matter of popping down to the local ice vendor with a cool bag. The ancient ice trade, or perhaps more accurately, the snow and ice procurement network, was a surprisingly complex, often slippery, and undoubtedly high-stakes business, especially when dealing with such an ephemeral product. Imagine the logistics. You're dealing with a commodity that is actively trying to disappear, to revert to its natural liquid state, especially as it travels from cold, high-altitude sources to warm, populous lowlands. Speed, insulation, and careful handling were the watchwords of this ancient enterprise. The supply chain, as we'd call it today, was a delicate dance against the sun and the ambient temperature. The first rule of ancient ice club was, you do not let the ice melt. The second rule of ancient ice club was, you do not let the ice melt. In Mesopotamia, as we saw, this often meant donkey caravans laden with insulated blocks of ice, making their slow, steady way down from the Zagros Mountains. Each animal, each driver, was a vital link in this chilly chain. The value of the cargo would have been immense, not just in monetary terms, but in the effort expended to acquire it. You can bet that the routes chosen were the most direct, perhaps even patrolled or protected if the ice was destined for a particularly powerful king. Any delay, any mishap, a lame donkey, a broken axle on a cart if carts were used on flatter sections, or worse, an ambush by bandits who fancied a surprisingly cold spoils of war could jeopardize the entire shipment. Sorry, King Hammurabi, your ice shipment was intercepted. The bandits sent a thank you note for the chilled loot. In ancient Persia, While some yakchals could produce ice locally, many still relied on supplementary ice transported from the mountains, especially to fill those massive storage pits quickly during the winter harvesting season. The principles were the same: cut, insulate, transport. The existence of well-maintained royal roads in the Persian Empire would have certainly facilitated such transport, at least between major centers. A historical fact is that the Persian Royal Road, established by Darius the Great, was an engineering marvel, with regular staging posts and fresh horses for royal couriers. While primarily for communication and official travel, it's conceivable that such infrastructure also benefited the movement of high-value goods, including, perhaps, imperial ice shipments. For the Greeks and Romans, reliant on mountain snow, the trade often involved specialized runners or fast mule teams. These weren't your average delivery guys, they had to be swift and reliable. Pliny the Elder mentions how Emperor Nero would have snow brought from the mountains, and it was a point of pride that it arrived clean and untainted. This implies a certain level of care and professionalism in the handling. The snow shops that emerged in some Greek and Roman cities were essentially retailers in this luxury market. They would have had their own networks of suppliers, their own likely smaller insulated storage pits, and their own clientele of wealthy citizens. A quirky tidbit: one can imagine fierce competition between these snow merchants, perhaps even a bit of ancient industrial espionage. Where does Flavius get his snow so white and fluffy? Is he bribing the mountain nymphs? The economics of this trade were fascinating. Ice and snow were, by their very nature, seasonal and geographically restricted in their raw form. This scarcity in hot climates and during summer months drove up their value astronomically. The further it had to travel, and the more sophisticated the storage required, the more expensive it became. It was the ultimate discretionary spend for the ancient elite. The cost would have factored in not just the raw material, which was free in nature, but required labor to access, but also the immense human effort of harvesting, the specialized labor for transport, the construction and maintenance of storage facilities, and the inevitable losses due to melting along the way. Historians and economists who study ancient markets sometimes debate the exact profit margins and the scale of this ice economy, but it was clearly lucrative enough to sustain these complex networks for centuries. And who were the people doing the actual work? The ice cutters, the mule drivers, the pit attendants. They were the unsung heroes of this ancient quest for cool. Their labor was often grueling, performed in harsh conditions, yet it was their sweat and toil that allowed the wealthy to sip their chilled wines. We'll delve more into their lives later, but for now, it's important to recognize that the ancient ice trade wasn't just about clever engineering. It was built on human endeavor. This trade also spurred innovation in insulation and transport technology, albeit within the constraints of ancient materials. Better ways to pack snow, lighter and more efficient containers, faster routes, all these would have been constantly, if incrementally, refined. Perhaps there were even ice brokers or middlemen who coordinated large shipments, taking a cut for their organizational efforts. It was a slippery business in every sense of the word, but one that demonstrates the surprising reach and complexity of ancient commerce when a desirable enough product was involved. The desire for a little bit of winter in the heart of summer was a powerful economic motivator. While the thought of a chilled wine on a scorching Roman afternoon or a refreshing Persian faluda certainly paints a tempting picture of ancient ice use. The applications of this precious commodity often extended beyond mere culinary delight and ostentatious luxury. As you delve deeper into the frosty annals of history, you discover that ice and snow also played a significant, if sometimes overlooked, role in ancient medicine. The power of cold to soothe, to numb, to preserve. These properties were not lost on the physicians and healers of antiquity. Imagine you're an ancient physician, perhaps a student of Hippocrates in Greece, or a Roman doctor tending to a feverish patient or a gladiator with a nasty wound. Your pharmacopoeia consists mainly of herbs, minerals, and perhaps some rather alarming animal products. But you also have another tool, albeit a more ephemeral one if you're not careful cold. The application of cold packs, made from snow or ice wrapped in cloth, would have been a recognized method for reducing fevers. In an era before antibiotics, a raging fever could easily be a death sentence. Anything that could bring down a dangerously high body temperature, even temporarily, would have been a welcome intervention. You can picture a worried family member rushing to the local snow cellar, not for a dinner party, but for a life-saving compress. Quickly, the best snow you have. The doctor says it's our only hope. A key historical fact here is that Hippocrates himself, in his medical writings from around the 4th century BCE, discussed the therapeutic use of cold. He recommended applying cold to staunch bleeding, reduce swelling, and alleviate pain from sprains or injuries. This wasn't just folk medicine. It was an observed and documented practice by one of the most influential figures in the history of medicine. He understood that cold constricts blood vessels, which helps to limit hemorrhage and inflammation. While his theories on the body's humors might seem outdated to us, his practical observations on the effects of cold were remarkably astute. So, when that Roman gladiator took a nasty hit to the shoulder, a snowpack might have been slapped on it pretty quickly to try and keep the swelling down, assuming he was a prize fighter worth the expense of the snow, of course. The less successful ones probably just got a stern talking to and some cheap wine. Beyond fevers and injuries, snow and ice had other potential medical applications. They could be used to numb areas for minor surgical procedures. Ancient anesthesiology was rudimentary at best, so any numbing agent would be highly valued. Imagine trying to extract a deeply embedded splinter or stitch a wound with a struggling patient. A bit of localized cold could make the ordeal slightly more bearable for everyone involved. It might also have been used to preserve delicate medicinal compounds or poultices for short periods, especially those made from perishable plant materials. The cool, stable environment of an ice pit, even if primarily for food and drink, could have served a secondary purpose as a kind of ancient pharmaceutical fridge for high-value medical supplies. A rather quirky tidbit is the ancient Roman practice, mentioned by writers like Pliny the Elder, of using decoctions of snow, essentially melted snow water that was then boiled and perhaps flavored, as a supposed health tonic. There was a belief that water from melted snow had special purifying or invigorating properties. Whether this had any actual medical benefit is highly debatable, and modern science would likely say no, given potential impurities in ancient snow. But it shows how cold and its sources were sometimes imbued with almost mystical health-giving qualities. Historians still argue whether such practices were based on empirical observation of some benefit, however slight, or were more rooted in philosophical ideas about the purity of high-altitude elements, or simply the placebo effect of consuming something so rare and valued. The challenge, as always, was availability. While a wealthy Roman noble might have a private snow pit for his feasting needs, would that snow be readily accessible for general medical use? Probably not for the average citizen. However, for the elite, or in military field hospitals during campaigns in hot regions like Alexander the Great's efforts, the medical benefits of readily available cold would have been a significant advantage. Keeping soldiers healthier or helping them recover from wounds more quickly would have had direct strategic implications. Perhaps the ice minister we joked about earlier also had a minister of chilled bandages working alongside him. So, the next time you reach for an ice pack to soothe a sprain, or pop a couple of ice cubes into a drink to cool down a fever, remember that you're partaking in a tradition that stretches back millennia. The ancient peoples, without understanding the precise microbiology of infection or the exact physiology of inflammation, recognized the power of cold. They saw its ability to bring relief from pain, to reduce the body's fiery excesses, and they ingeniously found ways to harness that power, even in the most challenging of climates. The yakchals and snow pits weren't just monuments to luxury, they were also, in their own way, early bastions against suffering, frosty allies in the age-old human battle against illness and injury. As our frosty exploration continues, you begin to realize that the ancient quest for coolness wasn't confined to just one or two superstar civilizations like Persia or Rome. While yakchals and imperial snow pits might grab the headlines, The desire for ice and the ingenuity to procure and store it flickered in many corners of the ancient world, leading to a fascinating array of regional innovations and adaptations. It's like discovering that your favorite indie band actually had a whole global scene of contemporary artists working on similar yet distinct vibes. Travel with me in your mind to different landscapes, different cultures. Consider ancient India. While perhaps not as famous for ice houses as Persia, there are suggestions that in the northern, mountainous regions, techniques for harvesting and storing snow and ice would have been known and utilized, particularly by local rulers and monasteries nestled in the Himalayas. The principles would have been similar: collect ice in winter, store it in insulated pits or caves, and use it sparingly during the warmer months for cooling drinks, preserving food, or for medicinal purposes. The specific design might have incorporated locally available materials, different types of stone, timber, or insulating grasses, reflecting the unique environment. Imagine a Buddhist monk in a high-altitude monastery, enjoying a moment of cool contemplation with water chilled by last winter's snows. A different kind of imperial luxury, perhaps, but a luxury nonetheless. Or journey to the edges of the ancient world, to cooler, more temperate climates in parts of Europe. While the need for long-term ice storage might have been less acute than in the scorching deserts, the concept of the ice house still took root, particularly from the Roman period onwards, and then developing more fully in later centuries based on these ancient foundations. Early European ice houses, often found on large estates, were typically well-insulated underground chambers or stone structures built into north-facing hillsides. They would be filled with ice cut from frozen lakes and rivers during winter. A historical fact is that the practice of constructing dedicated ice houses became quite widespread among the European aristocracy by the 17th and 18th centuries. But their design principles, deep pits, thick insulation, drainage, owed a debt to the knowledge that had been accumulating since antiquity. They weren't reinventing the wheel entirely, they were refining ancient spokes, even in regions where large-scale ice harvesting wasn't feasible. Smaller-scale cooling techniques based on similar principles were employed. Think of the simple wine cooler used in many Mediterranean cultures, an earthenware pot soaked in water, relying on evaporative cooling to chill its contents. This is the same basic physics that helps a yakchal function, just on a microscale. It's about understanding how water, air, and insulation interact to draw away heat. A quirky tidbit comes from the ingenuity sometimes shown in acquiring the ice itself when mountains weren't nearby or night freezing wasn't efficient enough. There are accounts, though some are debated for their widespread applicability in deep antiquity, of people creating shallow clay pans, filling them with water at night in areas with clear skies and low humidity, and orienting them to maximize radiative cooling to space. Even if the ambient air temperature didn't drop below freezing, the surface of the water could sometimes reach freezing point and form a thin layer of ice by morning. This hoarfrost, or pan ice, would be painstakingly scraped up and collected. It's a testament to how desperate people were for even small amounts of ice. The efficiency would be low, the labor high, but the reward, a touch of cold, was evidently worth it. Historians and archaeologists often engage in scholarly debate regarding the extent of cross-cultural transmission of these ice-making and storage technologies. Did the Romans learn from the Persians? Or did ideas travel along ancient trade routes like the Silk Road, with merchants carrying not just spices and silks, but also knowledge of how to build a better ice pit? Or did similar solutions arise independently in different cultures facing similar climatic challenges? It's likely a combination of both: parallel innovation and the slow diffusion of good ideas. You can almost picture an ancient engineer hearing a traveler's tale of a fantastic Persian ice dome, thinking, goat hair and egg whites? You say interesting. The beauty of these global ice house innovations lies in their adaptation to local conditions. In one region, you might find deep, narrow pits perfect for the local geology. In another, above-ground structures made of a unique local stone with exceptional insulating properties. In yet another, a system reliant on capturing and channeling prevailing night winds. The fundamental goal was the same, to create and maintain a pocket of cold, but the expressions of that goal were wonderfully diverse, reflecting the varied tapestry of human ingenuity. It wasn't a monolithic technology, but a spectrum of solutions, each tailored and refined. The desire to tell summer to chill out was clearly a universal ancient language, spoken with many different architectural accents. Amidst all this talk of ingenious yakchals, Roman snow pits, and imperial Chinese ice stores, it's easy to get caught up in the grandeur of the engineering and the luxury of the final product. But you must remember, none of this frosty magic happened by itself. Behind every chilled goblet of wine, every preserved delicacy, every soothing cold compress, there was an army of human hands, often toiling in grueling conditions. Let's pull back the curtain from the perfumed banquet halls and peer into the harsher world of the ancient ice harvesters and carriers, the unsung heroes of the pre-fridge era. Imagine yourself as one of these individuals. If you were an ice cutter in the Zagros or Apennine Mountains, your winter would be a season of intense, back-breaking labor. Long before dawn, you'd be trudging up snow-covered slopes, the air biting at your exposed skin, your breath crystallizing in front of you. Your tools would be simple, heavy axes to chop through thick river ice, long saws to cut it into manageable blocks, iron-tipped poles to maneuver the frozen slabs. The work was physically demanding and fraught with danger. Slipping on the ice, the risk of frostbite, or even avalanches in steeper terrain. These were constant companions. And for all this, the pay, if you weren't an outright slave or a conscripted laborer, was likely meager. You were providing a luxury for others, but living a life of hardship yourself. It's the ancient equivalent of those folks who climb utility poles in a blizzard to restore power. Essential, dangerous, and probably not getting nearly enough hazard pay. Once the ice or compacted snow was harvested, it needed to be transported. If you were part of a donkey caravan in Mesopotamia or Persia, your days would be spent guiding laden animals down treacherous mountain paths, then across sun-baked plains. You'd be constantly battling the elements, trying to protect your precious melting cargo. The dust, the heat, the threat of bandits. It was a relentless journey. A historical fact often overlooked is the sheer number of people and animals such an operation would require. To supply even a single large ice house for a season would necessitate hundreds, if not thousands, of man-hours and animal hours just for transport. Or picture yourself as a Roman Nivarius, a snow collector. You might be part of a team that races against time, carrying sacks of snow on your back or loading them onto swift mules. You'd travel mostly at night to minimize melting, navigating by moonlight or flickering torches. Sleep would be a luxury, exhaustion a constant state, and when you finally reach the city or the nobleman's villa, your job wasn't done. The snow had to be carefully unpacked and meticulously layered into the insulated pits, a task requiring precision and care to ensure maximum preservation. You probably smelled permanently of damp straw and exertion. One quirky tidbit: it's been speculated that these snow runners might have developed their own specialized slang, or songs to pass the time and keep their spirits up during those long, cold, nocturnal journeys. Yo ho ho in a bucket of snow, perhaps sung with chattering teeth. In ancient China, the imperial ice harvesting operations were on an even grander scale. Thousands of peasants could be conscripted for the winter ice cutting. For them, it was a corvée labor, a duty owed to the state, often performed under harsh conditions with little personal benefit beyond avoiding punishment. The sheer organization required to mobilize, feed, and oversee such a massive workforce speaks volumes about the importance placed on ice by the imperial court. While officials in warm robes supervised, these laborers endured the biting cold, their frozen efforts destined to cool the summer palaces of an emperor they might never see. The lives of those who maintained the ice houses were also specialized. These attendants were responsible for managing the ice stores, ensuring proper insulation, dealing with meltwater, and doling out the ice as required. They needed to understand the principles of preservation, to know how to pack the ice to minimize melt, and to guard it jealously against theft or spoilage. They were the custodians of cold, the gatekeepers of this valuable resource. Historians still debate the social status of these workers. Were they trusted servants, skilled artisans in their own right, or simply low-status laborers tasked with a chilly, damp, and often dark job? The answer likely varied across cultures and time periods. It's a sobering thought, the immense human effort that underpinned this ancient luxury. For every aristocrat enjoying a chilled delicacy, there were dozens, perhaps hundreds, of ordinary people whose toil made it possible. Their names are lost to history, their individual stories untold, but their collective labor, etched into the frozen lakes and snowy mountainsides, carried down dusty roads and packed into deep, dark pits, was the true foundation of the ancient world's quest for coolness. They were the invisible engine driving this entire frosty enterprise, their sweat and perseverance the price of keeping the ancient world refreshed. So, the next time you casually reach for an ice cube, spare a thought for its ancient predecessors and the calloused hands that brought them into being. You've witnessed the incredible effort of harvesting ice from frozen rivers and snowy peaks, the perilous journeys to transport it, and the ingenious designs of the structures built to house it. But all of that would be for naught if the ancient ice keepers didn't have some truly clever tricks up their sleeves for the most crucial part, actually keeping the ice solid. Sometimes for many, many months in the face of summer's relentless siege. The battle against melting was fought daily, and the weapons were surprisingly simple, yet remarkably effective insulation. 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 And a deep understanding of how to work with nature, not just against it. Let's revisit those subterranean pits and grand yachtals. The first line of defense, as we've seen, was the earth itself. Digging deep underground provided a naturally cooler, more stable environment, shielded from the drastic temperature swings of the surface. But earth alone wasn't enough. The real secret lay in creating multiple barriers, a sort of thermal obstacle course for any intruding heat. The walls of these ice stores, whether they were Mesopotamian pits, Persian domes, or Roman cellars, were invariably thick. In the case of yachtals, we saw the use of sarouge mortar, a super-insulating waterproof concoction. Other cultures would use thick stone, tightly packed clay, or multiple layers of timber. The idea was to create thermal mass, materials that could absorb and hold temperature, slowing down the penetration of external heat. Then came the layers of organic insulating materials, the ancient world's equivalent of modern foam or fiberglass. Straw was a universal favorite. It's light. It traps a lot of air, and still air is a fantastic insulator, and it was readily available in agricultural societies. Thick beds of straw would be laid down in the base of the ice pit, and the blocks of ice or compacted snow would be carefully stacked upon it. More straw would be packed tightly around the sides, filling every nook and cranny, and a very deep layer of straw would cover the top of the ice stack. It was like swaddling a precious frozen baby in a giant, scratchy blanket. You wanted that ice to feel snug, secure, and completely unaware of the summer raging outside. Sawdust was another excellent insulator. For much the same reason as straw, it created countless tiny air pockets. If timber was being processed nearby, sawdust would be a valuable byproduct, perfect for lining an ice house. Reeds, rushes, dried leaves, chaff the husks of grains, and even coarse animal wool or felted animal hair were also employed. The choice of material often depended on local availability and what had been empirically proven to work best in that specific region. A historical fact is that the insulating properties of these organic materials were well understood through centuries of trial and error. They weren't just throwing random stuff in there. There was a method to their frosty madness. Drainage, as we've mentioned, was a silent but critical partner to insulation. Any meltwater had to be whisked away immediately. If water pooled around the ice, it would conduct heat and accelerate further melting far more effectively than air. So, a slightly sloped floor, gravel beds, or dedicated drainage channels leading out of the icehouse were essential design features. Some yachtals even had complex systems to ensure that meltwater didn't just drain away, but was perhaps even channeled to irrigate nearby gardens, making use of every precious drop. Nothing wasted. It's a bit like having a fridge that also waters your plants. Surprisingly eco-friendly for ancient tech. The orientation and design of the ice house entrance were also crucial. Entrances were typically small, often facing north away from the sun in the northern hemisphere, and sometimes designed with a double door system or a deeply recessed tunnel-like entryway to create an airlock effect, minimizing the exchange of warm outside air with the precious cool air inside when access was needed. The door itself would be heavily insulated, perhaps a thick wooden plug packed with straw. One quirky tidbit is that in some cultures, there might have been superstitions or rituals associated with opening the ice house, perhaps only allowing certain individuals to enter, or only doing so at specific, cooler times of day, all to protect the sanctity of the stored cold. Who dares disturb the slumber of the mighty ice, what the attendant might jokingly or not so jokingly proclaim. Furthermore, the sheer volume of the stored ice played a role in its own preservation. A very large, densely packed mass of ice has a much lower surface area to volume ratio than a small amount, and it possesses a significant cold reserve. The outer layers might melt slowly, but they would, in turn, help to keep the core frozen for much longer. This is why ancient ice houses were often so enormous. Size mattered when it came to long-term chill. Historians and experimental archaeologists sometimes debate the exact R-values, a measure of thermal resistance of these ancient insulating methods, trying to reconstruct and test the efficiency of different materials and packing techniques. But the proof, as they say, is in the pudding, or in this case, in the centuries of successful ice storage. These ancient peoples, using locally sourced natural materials, created environments so well insulated that they could defy scorching summers and keep winter's frost locked away. It's a testament to their keen observation, their patience, and their profound understanding of how to work with the fundamental laws of thermodynamics. Even if they didn't call them that, they just knew what kept things cool. Our frosty journey through time has shown us incredible peaks of ingenuity: the majestic yachtchals, the organized Roman snow trade, the imperial ice rituals of China. But what happened to these remarkable cooling arts as empires crumbled? Trade routes shifted, and new societal structures emerged. Like many sophisticated technologies from antiquity, the story of ancient ice houses involves periods of decline, lost knowledge, and then, often, fascinating rediscoveries or parallel evolutions in later eras. It wasn't always a straightforward march towards better refrigeration. Sometimes, humanity had to relearn how to chill out. Consider the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century CE. The subsequent period in Europe, often dubbed the Dark Ages, though historians now prefer terms like the Early Middle Ages, as it wasn't uniformly dark, saw a decline in large-scale infrastructure projects and long-distance luxury trade. The highly organized Roman system for harvesting and distributing snow likely fragmented or disappeared in many regions. While local knowledge of preserving snow in simple pits or cellars probably persisted in some areas, especially in monasteries or isolated rural estates, the widespread, sophisticated use of centrally managed snow reserves for urban elites would have diminished. The focus shifted to more immediate survival needs, and chilled wine probably fell down the priority list for a while. Sorry, Lord Farquaad. The snow delivery from the Alps is indefinitely delayed due to barbarian incursions and a general collapse of logistical infrastructure. However, the knowledge wasn't entirely extinguished. In the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, which persisted for another 1,000 years, Roman traditions, including those related to luxury and engineering, continued. It's plausible that the use of snow and ice storage, influenced by both Roman and nearby Eastern practices like those in Persia, endured there. Meanwhile, in Persia and other parts of the Middle East and Central Asia, the Yakchal tradition continued to flourish and evolve for many centuries. Well into the Islamic Golden Age and beyond, these structures were too effective, too well suited to the climate, to be easily abandoned. In fact, some yakchals were still in use, or their principles understood and applied. up until the advent of modern mechanical refrigeration in the 19th and 20th centuries. This is a key historical fact. The yachtchel represents an incredibly long-lived and successful indigenous technology. In China, too, the imperial tradition of ice harvesting and storage continued through various dynasties, a testament to its deep cultural importance. While specific techniques might have been refined or adapted, the fundamental system of winter harvesting and summer use persisted. The lost arts aspect becomes particularly interesting when we look at Europe again. As it emerged from the Middle Ages and entered the Renaissance and early modern period, as wealth and stability increased, so did the desire for luxuries, including cooled food and drinks. There was a rediscovery, or rather, a renewed interest and development in icehouse technology. Wealthy landowners and aristocrats began building more elaborate ice houses on their estates, often drawing on principles that, consciously or unconsciously, echoed ancient designs, subterranean or well-insulated structures, careful packing of ice harvested from lakes in winter, and good drainage. A quirky tidbit is that some of these later European ice houses became quite ornate, almost like garden follies, their functional purpose hidden beneath a charming rustic exterior. It was less cone of cool and more cottage of chill. Scholars often debate the lines of transmission for these later European ice houses. Was it a direct inheritance of Roman techniques that had survived in pockets? Was it knowledge reintroduced from the East through travelers or texts? Perhaps during the Crusades or via trade with the Ottoman Empire, which had inherited Byzantine and Persian traditions? Or was it largely an independent redevelopment driven by similar needs and rediscovered principles? It's likely a mix of all three. The fundamental physics of keeping something cold don't change, so similar solutions will often arise, but a little ancient inspiration probably didn't hurt. The interesting thing is that even as these later frosts appeared, the core challenges remained the same as those faced by King Zimri Lim or a Persian ice merchant: how to get the ice, how to insulate it, how to stop it from melting. The materials might have evolved slightly, perhaps better timber, more sophisticated masonry, but the reliance on straw, sawdust, and the Earth's natural coolness was a constant. It shows that good ideas, even very old ones, have a way of enduring or re-emerging when the conditions are right. The ancient world had laid down the frosty foundations, and later generations, whether they knew it or not, were often building upon them, slowly paving the way for the age of mechanical refrigeration that would eventually revolutionize how humanity keeps cool. But before we get there, the simple yet effective ice house had many more centuries of chilly service to offer. As we watch the flickering lamp of ancient ice technology persist through centuries, sometimes dimming, sometimes flaring up anew with rediscovery and refinement, you begin to see a fascinating trajectory. These ancient ice houses, yachtchals, and snow pits weren't just historical curiosities. They were crucial stepping stones, the direct conceptual ancestors of the cooling technologies that immediately preceded modern electrical refrigeration. They were, in essence, the world's first refrigerators, albeit powered by nature, human labor, and a whole lot of straw, rather than Freon in a power socket. Think about the fundamental purpose of an ancient ice house: to create a dedicated, insulated space where a pre-existing source of cold, natural ice or snow could be preserved for later use, primarily to cool food and drinks. Now, fast forward many centuries, past the grand European estate ice houses of the 17th and 18th centuries, which directly evolved from these ancient principles. As we enter the 19th century, before electric refrigerators became household items, the dominant cooling technology in many homes was the icebox. And what was an icebox? Really, it was a compact, domesticated version of an ice house. You didn't have to go out to the giant pit in the backyard anymore. You had a miniature one right in your kitchen. Well, maybe not your kitchen if you were poor, but you get the idea. The icebox, typically a wooden cabinet lined with tin or zinc, had a compartment for a large block of ice and another insulated compartment for food. The ice, often delivered by an iceman, a profession that itself has a nostalgic, almost mythical quality now, would slowly melt, and the cold air would circulate, keeping the food cool. Sound familiar? It's the same core principle used the stored cold of ice to lower the temperature of an enclosed space. The main difference was the scale and the source of the ice. By the 19th century, a massive natural ice trade had developed, with ice harvested from frozen lakes and rivers in colder regions, especially in North America, and shipped incredibly all over the world. This natural ice industry, a historical fact of enormous economic importance in its day, was what filled those domestic ice boxes. Frederick the Ice King, Tudor, an American businessman, famously pioneered this international ice trade in the early 1800s, shipping New England ice to the Caribbean and even as far as India. Imagine ancient Persians hearing about shipping ice across oceans. They'd probably say, "Amateurs, we made our own in the desert." But the very idea of having a dedicated, insulated container to keep things cold using ice is a direct descendant of those ancient pits and yachtals. The materials changed from mud brick and sarouge to oak and tin, but the underlying concept of thermal insulation, minimizing heat ingress, and utilizing the latent heat diffusion of ice remained constant. The challenges were also similar: how to make the insulation effective. How to manage meltwater ice boxes had drip pans that needed emptying, a charming daily chore, and how to ensure a steady supply of ice. The Iceman, with his horse-drawn wagon and giant tongs, was the 19th century equivalent of the Roman snow runner or the Persian ice harvester, a vital link in the cold chain. Even the transition from simply cooling drinks and high-value luxuries to more widespread food preservation echoes the journey that began in antiquity. While early ice houses primarily served the elite for their banquets and chilled wines, the potential for preserving food for longer periods was always an implicit benefit. The icebox made this benefit accessible to a much broader segment of the population, though still not everyone initially, significantly impacting diet, food safety, and culinary practices. No longer did meat have to be consumed immediately or heavily salted. Dairy products could be kept longer. It was a quiet revolution, built on blocks of frozen water. A quirky tidbit: early icebox advertisements often touted their scientific design and hygienic properties. Much like one imagines, an ancient king might have boasted about the purity of the snow from his royal mountain. The limitations of the icebox era, the dependence on ice delivery, the mess of meltwater, the inconsistent temperatures, are what ultimately spurred the development of mechanical refrigeration. But for several generations, the icebox was the epitome of domestic cooling, and it stood firmly on the shoulders of those ancient innovators who first dared to defy summer's heat by digging pits and building cones of cool. There's a clear lineage here. Archaeologists and historians of technology often trace these evolutionary paths, showing how ancient solutions, born of necessity and observation, laid the conceptual groundwork for much later, more technologically advanced systems. The debate isn't usually about if there's a connection, but rather about the specific pathways of influence and the moments of independent rediscovery versus direct transmission of knowledge. So, as you see, the journey from a snow-filled Roman pit to your grandmother's or great-grandmother's oaken icebox isn't such a giant leap in principle. It's an evolution, a refinement, a scaling down for domestic use. The ancient world, with its yachtals and carefully insulated cellars, didn't just give us cool stories, it gave us the very idea that cold could be captured, stored, and put to work, a foundational concept that would eventually lead to the effortlessly chilled lives many of us lead today. They were the original cool pioneers. And so, as our journey through the ingenious world of ancient ice houses draws to a close, you're left not just with images of towering yachtals or snow-filled Roman pits, but with a profound appreciation for the enduring thread of human ingenuity. These ancient peoples, armed with little more than natural materials, keen observation, and a relentless desire to conquer the heat, devised solutions so elegant and effective that their principles still resonate today. The echoes of their ancient wisdom can be found, if you look closely enough, even in our modern, hyper-cooled world. Consider the core concepts they mastered: thermal mass, insulation, evaporative cooling, radiative cooling, and passive ventilation. The Persians with their yakshals didn't have advanced degrees in thermodynamics, but they intuitively understood how a thick mud brick wall could absorb and slow heat transfer, how the conical shape of a dome could promote airflow, how a shaded, shallow pool of water under a clear desert sky could surrender its heat and freeze. This is a historical fact. The design of the Yakchal incorporated multiple passive cooling strategies in a remarkably synergistic way. It wasn't just one trick, it was a whole symphony of them. Today, as we grapple with the challenges of energy consumption and sustainable living, there's a growing movement in architecture and engineering known as passive design or bioclimatic architecture. This approach seeks to design buildings that work with their environment, using natural principles to heat, cool, and ventilate, thereby reducing reliance on energy-intensive mechanical systems. And where do you think these modern architects and engineers often look for inspiration to ancient and vernacular traditions, including structures like the Yakchal or the wind catchers badgirs of the Middle East? The wisdom of using thick walls for thermal stability in hot climates, orienting buildings to minimize solar gain, utilizing natural ventilation, and even incorporating evaporative cooling through fountains or water features, these are all lessons learned from our ancient ancestors. They were the original green builders, out of necessity perhaps, but with results that still impress. A quirky tidbit: some modern sustainable cooling projects, especially in arid regions, are experimenting with designs that directly mimic the Yakchal's ability to make ice or cool air using only nocturnal radiative and evaporative cooling, without any external power input. It's like history coming full circle, with 21st century science validating and refining techniques that were perfected millennia ago. The ancient builders might not have had computer models to optimize their designs, but their trial and error, passed down through generations, led to incredibly sophisticated results. See, they might say to a modern engineer struggling with a complex HVAC system, sometimes egg whites and a bit of common sense are all you need. The legacy of these ancient cooling methods also reminds us of the value of local resources and climate-responsive design. Each region we visited, from Mesopotamia to China to Rome, developed solutions tailored to its specific environment and available materials. There wasn't a one-size-fits-all global ice house, there was a rich diversity of approaches. This adaptability is another crucial lesson for us today, as we seek to build more resilient and sustainable communities. Moreover, the story of ancient ice houses is a powerful testament to human perseverance and our innate drive to improve our living conditions. The sheer effort involved in harvesting, transporting, and storing ice in a pre-industrial world was monumental. Yet, for centuries, people undertook this labor because the reward, a touch of coolness, preserved food, medical relief, or simply the luxurious delight of a chilled drink, was deemed worth it. It speaks to a fundamental human desire for comfort and control over our environment. Scholars often debate the primary drivers of technological innovation. Was it necessity, luxury, or something else? In the case of ancient ice houses, it seems to be a potent cocktail of all of them. So, the next time you open your refrigerator and are greeted by its cool, steady hum and its effortless production of ice, take a moment to remember its ancient, toiling ancestors. Remember the Mesopotamian king with his mountain-harvested shuripum, the Persian architect calculating the curve of a Yakchal dome, the Chinese official overseeing the imperial ice harvest, the Roman slave rushing snow down from the Apennines, and the countless unnamed laborers who made it all possible. Their quest for coolness, their ingenious solutions, are not just a fascinating chapter in our shared history. They are an enduring inspiration, a reminder that with creativity, observation, and a willingness to learn from the world around us, even the most formidable challenges can be met, and even the fiercest summer can be, if only for a moment, deliciously chilled. And so, our exploration of these ancient frosty marvels, the ice houses of ages past, melts away into the quiet of the night. We've journeyed from the sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia to the ingenious conical domes of Persia, From the imperial ice cellars of China to the snow pits of Rome, unearthing the incredible resourcefulness of our ancestors in their timeless quest for coolness. The sheer effort, the clever designs, the intuitive understanding of natural principles. It all paints a vivid picture of humanity's enduring ability to innovate and adapt. As these images of ancient ingenuity begin to soften and fade, like frost in the morning sun, allow yourself to drift into that peaceful space between wakefulness and sleep. The challenges of those ancient ice harvesters are long past, their labors done. Now, there is only the stillness of the night, the gentle rhythm of your breathing, and the promise of restorative rest. Let the coolness you've imagined tonight settle into a comfortable, soothing calm, and may your dreams be as peaceful and refreshing as a hidden spring in a desert oasis.